Hello, welcome to this course. This is Mujtaba Al-Hilo, your instructor in the 17th century poetry. And in fact, this is an introductory course on this poetry, on this century. And because in one course we cannot cover all the related historical, political, and theoretical fields of the poetry of this century. That's why we will try to focus on the most relative and important concepts, theories, and schools of the poetry of this age, of this century. And in the beginning, let's start with the coverage and covering of the most important political, social, religious, and theoretical backgrounds of this age of the 17th century in order to have a better understanding of what is going on in the poetry of this age. So, historical context of the 17th century, it is important to know the historical, political, social, and religious context of the 17th century to know the real spirit of the poetry of the age, because a successful literary text reflects the ideological conflicts of its time. According to Marxist critics, they believe that we should have reflectionism. Reflectionism, in fact, is a Marxist literary theory, which means that a successful literary text should reflect the spirit of the age, should reflect the conflict, the backgrounds of the age, because any literary text is the son or is born according to certain contexts. That's why we should never neglect those contexts in order to have a better understanding, a better criticism of the poetry of the age. We should go back and look into its history, its policy, and its theoretical background. That's why today we will talk about the historical background of the 17th century. After Queen Elizabeth. After the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, her cousin King James the Sixth of Scotland and the First of England was invited to become the King of England. King James believed himself to be chosen by God, and he had the right to rule the way he desires. Yet, most of the leaders of the country, who were members of the parliament, refused this type of reign, and thought that the parliament should take the main decisions. Finally, the king decided to send them home and rule without the parliament. King James VI marginalized the lords and chose only one of his friends as a council. He also confined the merchants for not paying the taxes. This weakened the state of his son, Charles, who became the king. The king and the church. There were two main Christian groups in England: the Roman Catholics and the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, who looked upon the King of England as the head of the church. The Anglican Church members were split into two groups: some who wanted the church to be controlled by bishops, and others who wanted very simple services and no bishops, who were called Puritans. Later, the king tried to reconcile between the two groups, but failed. Hence, he dismissed the Puritans and embraced the bishops, so the latter would not undermine the power of the king religiously. The king ordered all the Roman Catholic priests to exile. In return, some Catholics rented a cellar. The Catholics rented a cellar under the House of Parliament and stored 2 tons of gunpowder there. Their plan was to blow up the Parliament while the king is there, along with the Queen and the chief men of the government. But the plot was discovered and failed. Some of the Puritans quarreled with the king. Thus, they left England, determined to make for themselves a new England, where they could practice their belief in their own way. In August 1620, 102 people left England to sail to Virginia, they founded an English Puritan colony. The reign of King Charles I. In 1625, Charles I succeeded his father. Like his father, Charles I believed that kings have divine rights to rule and their acts are unquestionable. Thus, he married Henriette Maria, a Roman Catholic, daughter of the King of France, which caused an unpleasant reaction in English people. Quarrels between the king and parliament arose chiefly because the parliament refused to grant all the arbitrary demands of Charles. The king dissolved the parliament twice in 1625 and 1626. He was also encouraged to raise the taxes, which enraged the people, many of whom were already imprisoned because they could not pay such taxes. For the third time, the king approved the parliament in 1628 for his need for money, with certain conditions, but he opposed the conditions and created a hatred in the parliament members. The rage of people and the church lands rose because he married a Catholic princess, and the parliament distrusted her influence over her husband. The influence of the king's chief advisor in religion matters was unpleasant. He disliked the Puritanism and began to introduce changes in the church ceremony to win the Pope's approval. The king dissolved the parliament and ruled for 11 years without it. Disputes rose between the king and the Scottish people when the former forced the English prayer book, but the Scottish defeated the king's troops and sent them back. The Civil War. Charles went to the north of the country, joined by 10,000 royalists or cavaliers. The soldiers belonged to the gentry and nobility. The supporters of the parliament, or roundheads, were generally merchants and tradesmen who controlled London and the neighboring countries and most of the towns. The king sought to capture London. In the Solemn League and Covenant, the Roundheads made an alliance with Scotland. Finally, the Roundheads won victories at Marston Moor in 1644 and Naseby in 1645. Charles surrendered to the Scots, who turned him over to the army. Charles fled to the Isle of Wight and sought to bring a war against the fractions. Yet, again all the parties united, defeated the king, captured him, and finally executed him in 1649. The Commonwealth and the Protectorate. After the death of Charles I, England became a Commonwealth, that is, a country ruled by its elected members of parliament, without a king. Yet, the real power remains in the hands of the army. The Scots could not agree to this change and proclaimed Charles, the eldest son of Charles I, as King of Scotland and Ireland. However, Oliver Cromwell crossed over with an army, defeated the royalists, forcing Charles to flee to France. Cromwell thus established his own authority over the land. He was declared Lord Protectorate of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland. A council was to assist the Lord Protectorate as well as a House of Commons. Later, Cromwell dissolved the parliament and divided the country into 10 military districts. After the death of Cromwell, after a while, Charles II was proclaimed king in 1660 to 1685. Two great calamities befell England during the reign of Charles II. Number one, in the hot, dry summer of 1665, 70,000 of the inhabitants died of the plague. And number two, in September 1666, Two-thirds of the city of London was destroyed by a great fire, which lasted 5 days. They expanded their colonies in the countries, led to the migration of English people. James II. James, who was a Roman Catholic, became the king in 1685. James, after some revolutions, secured his place and began changing England into a Roman Catholic country. He admitted many Catholic officers to the army. He also declared that Roman Catholics and the Puritans should be allowed to worship as they pleased. The next heir was his daughter Mary, who was a Protestant and was married to William of Orange, the Protestant ruler of Holland. William landed England with an army, and the people sided with him, even the courtiers. Then James fled to France. Thus, William and Mary took the throne without bloodshed. William faced some dangers from France, which tried to restore James II to the throne, but William won the battles. So these were the most important historical backgrounds of the 17th century. We will see the rise of different literary schools according to these conflicts. We have the Cavaliers, we have the Roundheads, we have the supporters of the king, we have the supporters of the parliament, we have the supporters of the church, of different churches. So in this course we are going to get introduced to these different schools and theories according to these political conflicts. So please stay tuned and thank you for watching.